This is Beyond the Weekend, a podcast of Cornerstone Church, where we dig into the things we didn't have time for on Sunday. Welcome to BTW. Welcome to this week's episode of Beyond the Weekend. I'm Mandy Fowler, Director of Spiritual Formation for Cornerstone. And this week, I'm being joined by Steve Place. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks for having me again.
Steve, tell us about our little sister church over there on the west side.
Faith Community Church of West Michigan. It's on 7th Avenue. It's a lovely community church smack dab in the middle of a neighborhood.
Yeah.
So come and visit sometime.
Yeah, if you have any friends who live in the neighborhood, I would highly recommend.
I've heard that before. Yeah. There are people who say, "Oh, I know people that live by there." Well, yeah. Sunday morning,
send them
10
over.
to 11. Yeah. It's not a big time obligation. Yeah.
Send them over.
Yeah,
Steve sits on our teaching team, and so he is in the writing rotation, and he wrote the sermon for this past weekend about the Holy Spirit. So that's what we're here to talk about.
Yeah. We could either talk for a minute or 3 days about this.
Yeah. It's not a small topic, which is something that was challenging to write about, right? If you want to talk about that a little bit,
Very much so.
How do you write about the Holy Spirit in a 25 to 30 minute message?
Yeah, and we since this series is called Let's Go, it really is about the action of the Holy Spirit in transforming us and moving us to serve others and to love others and to exhibit the fruit of that Holy Spirit. And again, it could have taken so many roads, and it did. It was a struggle for me. It was a process of being too analytical sometimes and too trying to put a fine button on it. And with the presence of this triune God is not something we can wrap in a bow and say we're done.
No.
It's mysterious, but mysteriously beautiful.
Right. Well, and it is really hard. And we shared a metaphor at each of the campuses of a 3-note chord.
Yes.
And we were talking a little bit before we started recording just of how that's probably the best metaphor I've come across.
And you shared it with me. I learned it from you and was reminded. Actually, I'd heard that a while back, but we have so many bad analogies for the Holy Spirit. I don't even want to say them out loud because they're so limiting.
The forms of water.
Yes.
Yeah, we really try.
They're material. And the Holy Spirit, the Holy Trinity is not a material thing.
Right. And so there's something about bringing in music.
Yeah.
And
and what is music? It's sound waves.
Right.
And the disciples experienced, what was the first thing they experienced of the Holy Spirit was sound.
Right. Good point. Yeah, and I just love the idea that this chord does not exist without all 3 notes.
Exactly.
But it is a one thing.
Yeah, and it can exist, and they are individual elements.
Right, you can hear each note in the chord, but if you only played 2 of them, it wouldn't be the chord.
Right.
Yeah, so I think it's a really good metaphor, and to credit where credit's due. I heard it in the last class I had at seminary, which I was like, where has this been the whole time?
Yes.
But it came from a theologian. I don't know where he got it, but there's a theologian named Jeremy Begbie, and he's who my professor had learned it from. So, but I try to widely share that metaphor because I feel like it helps us. I mean, it's something that is very hard for our minds to grasp.
And it's a nice thing to remember when you're thinking of, you can close your eyes and pray to God and close your eyes and thank Jesus. And I've actually had friends of mine say when they've prayed to the Holy Spirit that's something they should not do. And I thought that's the oddest thing I've ever heard. That shows you how afraid I think we are sometimes of calling out a person, this person named the Holy Spirit.
Well, I think there's a lot of confusion too, because lots of confusion. I would say maybe especially in evangelical Christianity. Sure. I mean, there's a wide range of, from charismatic all the way to what's sometimes referred to as the frozen chosen, which is, mainline denominations who want to keep the Spirit at arm's length a bit. because of maybe the lack of, because of the unknown. There's a little bit of a question mark with the Holy Spirit, like we don't know quite what to make of the Spirit, and we know that we can't control the Spirit. So we kind of, are like, we'll just stay away a little bit.
Just keep it at arm's length, I think is a good way to say it. Because I don't think those people are discounting the presence of the Holy Spirit. They're just afraid of the manifestations that if I act out of control, then people will think ill of me.
Well, and we see that in that this is the first, scene of life with the Holy Spirit is, they're whatever they're doing gets interrupted. The rush of winds, the tongue of fire, the people speaking in languages, that's very unexpected. Very, they didn't have that in their agenda probably.
And what's the first reaction of the other people?
Oh yeah, you're drunk.
You're drunk.
Yeah.
How can you act like that?
Right. And so this is, that is, I would say, especially as people who maybe prioritize efficiency and plans and, certainty, we do not appreciate that. Yeah. And so I think that does make people a little uncomfortable because of the unknown aspect.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of misconceptions of the Holy Spirit just bashing you over the head with a revelation that's how
right.
I mean, and yesterday, and I'm sure the other pastors said the same thing, that the manifestation of that Holy Spirit doesn't always come in the rushing wind and the fire.
Right, something dramatic.
It became so gentle and calming and loving, in the Holy Spirit speaking to me, and the death of my son, and other traumatic and sometimes career changes that I had to make that were not of my choosing.
Right.
And it was quiet, and it was quiet but magnificent at the same time.
Yeah. I used to describe it. I mean, in my experience, it has usually been a nudge that that doesn't go away. Or that sometimes would be something that I typically wouldn't think of myself. So like, one example that comes to mind is I was at my last church I was at in California. We were at a family camp, and we had brought a number of women from the, crisis pregnancy.
Okay.
They were experiencing homelessness. So we brought them up for the week so they could enjoy just being away. And we were all kind of like, a group of us were just sitting outside in the sunshine, and I felt a prompting for us to go over to this specific woman and tell her she's going to be a good mom. And I was like, ooh, I don't know her though.
Yeah.
We were a second to meet, but I was like, okay. So, I went over and told her, and I don't know, who knows what she needed to hear. You kind of just, and who knows, if she even remembered that 2 days later, who knows? Yeah. But the point is I think recognizing that kind of a nudge, obeying it, and then it's out of your hands.
And there is a sense of, and we talked about surrender yesterday, and that sometimes we look at that as such a negative term, but to surrender is a powerful thing. To be able to say, I'm giving this, I'm going to go over and talk to a woman I've never talked to before. That's a brave thing to do, but you didn't do it under your own steam. This wasn't something you decided to do. You were nudged.
And it's crazy because I didn't know a single thing about her. Was she going to be a good mom? Right. I don't know. And if it had been up to me to judge, who knows what conclusion I would have reached. That wasn't mine to make. It was just mine to share. And that is the kind of thing the Holy Spirit is going to ask you to do.
Yes.
Sometimes it's stuff that if you're just thinking with your own logic and your own, oh, that's weird, or that's, we would dismiss it. And so I think that is sometimes a telltale sign of the Spirit's work. Not that it should be oh, is it crazy? It might be the Spirit, but that it's is this something that I would have come up with on my own? No. Yeah. That's just And
I found that the times that have felt that nudge or that push or that voice is when I'm mowing the lawn, or when I'm when I'm doing something that's routinized, and I'm out of my own head. I'm not thinking of anything else except doing that. And my example of my son was, I was watching a YouTube video of a Newsies song, and tears came to my eyes, and just uncontrollably, because the Holy Spirit says the name of the song, Seize the Day. And that's what the Holy Spirit at that point said, this is what your life is going to be. You're going to seize the day. And sure, probably is the author of that song, but
Right.
Holy Spirit used that.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think it's important for us to be, if you're like, I've never heard from the Holy Spirit, or just to be paying attention.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, I want to be
dismissive.
encouraging. That's a good point.
Yeah,
I don't want to. You're not less than. Yeah. If you're not feeling it, but be attentive, like you said, be attentive.
Pay attention.
Give yourself opportunities.
Right.
To do that, and solitude and silence quite often is a good way. Yeah. Reading scriptures and other.
Right. Yeah, there are ways that we can cultivate being able to hear from the Spirit, and there are things that we do that drown the voice of the Spirit out.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think it's important for us to recognize that there are things that we do to, we don't experience a lot of silence in our daily lives. No. And so what are the ways that we might be making it hard to hear from the Spirit? I also think, and I don't know what you think of this, but I think also the more that we ignore the voice of the Spirit, the quieter that voice gets.
I truly believe that.
Yeah.
I truly believe that.
So I think it's really important for us to pay attention, and not to put oh no, I didn't obey, and so now it's going to go away. That's not what we're saying, but just that is something that you cultivate. You cultivate a relationship with the Holy Spirit, and I think that the more that you recognize and obey that prompting, the more you'll hear from the Spirit, and then I feel like the less afraid you'll get.
I think so too. Yeah. If it's like any friendship, that you have to have conversations, and listen as much as you talk.
Yes, right. And it won't always necessarily be about doing. No. It might be to pray. No. You might feel prompted to pray. No. There's all kinds of ways that the Spirit speaks. So. I think figuring out what that looks like for you, and then figuring out how to make space. Those are couple good practical things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Let's see. What else did we have to talk about?
Let's talk gender.
Oh, yes, please. Gender of the Holy Spirit. Yeah, that's a challenge because we're a very... There's just the failure of the English language when it comes to Christianity is very hard because we have, very limited pronouns. Some languages have, genders for words, like Spanish and French and it doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's just, the difference between the article you use. I don't know. It gets very complicated. English isn't like that. No. And so, but we just have kind of just she, hear it. It's just our only options.
Right,
So that gets hard because, when we talk about the Spirit, often we kind of default to using he pronouns.
And it dawned on we had a pre-conversation, but it dawned on me just now that we start that whole thing out wrong. We set ourselves up for failure in this. We have God the Father, Jesus the Son, the Holy Spirit. He, I guess. But if we're created, if we, and the big we, are created in God's image, that means you too. And I'm pointing at Mandy right now.
Women and men created in the image of God. And so there is a conversation to be had there about then how do women image God if the whole Trinity is male?
And that's problematic. And I don't think God would design things that way. He didn't design things that way.
Yeah. So, and that can be challenging for people because, and it's interesting too, because, along the lines of what I was just talking about with, words having a gender in many languages in ancient Hebrew, the word that's used for the Spirit in the Old Testament is ruach, which is a feminine word. Yep. That doesn't necessarily mean, but that's just an interesting thing. And then in the Greek, most of the words used for Spirit in the New Testament are neuter, which means neither male nor female. But then a couple of the words are male, like advocate. And so most translations over time, just with their own preferences, have just translated those as he. Right. But the Bible actually is sort of gender neutral about the Spirit, which is really interesting. Yeah.
So, and point being, I think it's important for us, if we're going to be human beings with a male and female, that we acknowledge that the Holy Spirit, in my mind, is female. If the Holy Spirit births things, that, from my understanding of biology, that happens with one half of the species. And there is a let's just face it, a nurturing comforting presence to the Holy Spirit too, and that's I don't know if we're right or wrong, but I do know that I can rest comfortably knowing that the Holy Spirit is a feminine presence.
Well, and you may resonate with that or not, but the point is, it's not so. We tend to lock things in a way that I don't think, the Bible or doesn't do that. And so, but we tend to essentialize things in a way that we don't need to. There's all this mystery. There's so much mystery there that I think our rush to make it super concrete and black and white.
Well, and again, we were talking about the fear of recognizing the Holy Spirit because of the unknown. And we sometimes we just have to embrace the unknown. Right. And that's a hard thing to do because I want it defined. I want it, I've had people tell me before, unless you can empirically prove there's a God. And I said, well, then you're going to have a long wait. Right. That's not the way he works.
Well, and I think a lot of it just boils down to, here we are, 2025. So much of the world is explainable. So much of the world is, Googleable.
Yeah.
When we hit up in something that is a mystery, we don't like it. We want to solve a mystery. We want answers. And the truth is, this is a mystery. It's mystical. It's, it's abstract. It's beyond our brains to comprehend. And so when we try to limit it, put it in a box, with any aspect of God,
exactly.
I think we don't do God justice when we do that. So,
or ourselves.
Yeah. Right. And so, I think it's important to recognize that and see those impulses in ourselves and realize this is just a great mystery and something that, great thinkers have wrestled with for centuries. Absolutely. And so if we think I got this, right. I understand. So I love to think about and chat about that stuff, but I've really appreciated your willingness to engage in that conversation because,
and it's a conversation we'll continue on. And through the rest of this series, we will see the Holy Spirit at work. Yeah. In our lives and in the lives of the people that we're reading about.
Right. And that's kind of the main point of as this series kind of builds on itself. So last week we heard about, the mission that Jesus gives to go be witnesses. And then this week, it's all through the
power. How are they going to do that?
Yes. The power of the Holy Spirit, and the sending presence of the Holy Spirit, the presence of the Holy Spirit to give us courage and words and creativity and, all kinds of things that we don't have on our own, to enable us for this mission, not for ourselves, but for the sake of the world. Right. And I hope that everybody feels encouraged. Maybe, I think I used the word last week, the prayer in the prayer at the end of the service, it came to mind that God would enliven our hearts. Yeah. That this would spark something in us. That gives us courage and,
curiosity.
Yes. And energy.
Wanting to learn more, but then when you learn it, you don't put a period behind it, put a comma.
Right. Right.
We're going to keep learning.
Yeah. And to kind of see this as this journey that we're all on together, that none of us is supposed to do this alone. None of us is supposed to do this out of our own power. Yep. That God has gifted us with each other, with our community.
Absolutely.
And with the Holy Spirit, that we're not just out here, feeling this burden and, I got to do this all in my own power.
Right, exactly.
What a gift. Yep. Cool. Well, that's a good, I feel like that's a good, to just contain the Holy Spirit in 20 minutes.
There you go.
We did it.
Yeah, we did it. Put a button on it.
Sure nobody has any more questions.
Nothing else to be said about it.
We covered it all. Well, I hope that everybody's excited about this journey. Yeah, we have 3 more weeks in this series, and we kind of, using that Acts 1:8 verse about Jesus saying, you'll see the power of the Holy Spirit, and, you'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And so we're going to unpack the rest of that verse in these coming weeks and see what that kind of practically looks like. So hope you're as excited as we are.
Oh, yeah. Very excited.
All right. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Mandy.
All right. Talk to you next time. Beyond the Weekend is a podcast of Cornerstone Church, a multi-site church in the Grand Rapids, Michigan area. Please follow for more episodes and sermons or find us online at www.cornerstonemi.org. Thanks for listening.